If they would have been, I bet you 10% better, we would not be in this situation right now. We would probably have Kamala Harris as the president-elect, because most people are willing to swallow a lot of shit. You know what I mean? Like, we all have our own problems, all of our own stuff, but they went so in on all of the lies. The fact that Barack Obama, 2 days before the election, gave a speech, I think it was in Wisconsin, where he said that Donald Trump went to a white supremacist rally and said there were very fine people on both sides. The fact that he ran with that hoax again after it has been debunked
by people who wouldn't debunk it unless it was seriously not true.
I think the first time that got to mainstream media was me on Real Time, because James Carville brought it up with Maher, and I had never heard it said on mainstream, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. And I said, what are you talking about? The next sentence out of his mouth was, but I'm not talking about the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis who should be condemned entirely. But Carville literally crumbles to the table because he did not know what to do when confronted with reality. And then Bill said, well, it was worded inarticulately or something to that effect. And I thought, well, that's an interesting way of playing a little bit of cleanup on that. But the point is, they thought, I think Obama, what would your psychological analysis of Obama be right there? It's 2 days before the election. He either believes it, which there's no way he could be that dumb and ignorant. Simply impossible. But maybe you want to give him 5% chance. You want to give him 5%? What do you want to give him on that? Let's give him 20%, right? Okay, great, 20%. So he's unbelievably dumb and ignorant, and he ran the speech by nobody who's willing to confront him with reality. Or what would the only alternative be? He knows he can lie. It doesn't matter how big the lie is. And he thinks the lie will accomplish the goal, that the ends justify the means. I think they got to the end of that road. I think that's what this election was. You cannot tell us that there are very fine people on both sides. You can't tell us that Brett Kavanaugh is a serial rapist, or that the Covington kids are racist, or that Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist. I mean, we could do a million versions. That 6-foot social distancing was scientifically backed. And I think that's actually what this election was about. Trump then became the avatar that was sort of wrapped around that thing. And then Kamala basically became the avatar for the machine.
We talked too about the fact that in the last month, a lot of radical things happened around Trump the last month.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the fact that this weird coalition gathered around him, which is, completely preposterous. It's completely preposterous.
Yeah.
That Elon Musk is now going to be running the Department of Governmental Efficiency, and that has the same acronym as Doge.
Yeah.
That was a coin, and it's a funny dog, and it's do only good every day. It's like, what the hell is going on here? And it's ridiculously comical that Musk is actually an X-Man, because that's the name of his platform, and that idea has been obsessing him for years, and that Gabbard is on board, and that Robert F. Kennedy came along, and that Vance is along, and so is Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, these are very unlikely Republicans, very unlikely. And so that's weird as hell. And it's like, seriously, surreally, this is Pulp Fiction weird. It's
so what
really
do you think the unifying principle is? To me, it's that they love America. Like, that's sort of like you would say low resolution bumper sticker.
Yeah. I think it's analogous in some ways on the political side to what happened with the media, the new media that we were describing. There wasn't anything really that we had in common. Let's say you and I, or Weinstein, or Rogan, Shapiro, like that was a very diverse group of people.
It was free speech in the most, in the essence.
Yeah. It was, well, I think the thing we had in common essentially was our approach to discourse.
Yeah.
That was really all.
Yeah.
I mean, each of us taken in pairs had things in common, but it was devotion to discourse, open discourse, conversational discourse, essentially.
Yeah.
And in a sense, on agenda-free conversational discourse. I mean, one of the things that makes Rogan so perennially popular is that he's just trying to figure out what's going on. And that really is the case.
Yeah.
And Rogan, that what you see is what you get. All the people in that group are exactly the same on camera and off.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's no persona. They're just exactly who they are. And all of those people were and are iconoclastic, right? They didn't fit well in organizations. They all started their own thing. Mm-hmm. And that's really the same thing that's characteristic of these people that have gathered around Trump. And then, as we alluded to, we also have this other strange occurrence, which is the death throes of the legacy media. Douglas Murray, I talked to him the other day, and he said, well, don't throw all of the legacy media under the bus. There is the New York Post, for example. The Fox News people are trying to do their best. And,
sure.
You have the Free Press with Barry, but that's new media too. Mm-hmm. So by and large, the liberal end of the legacy media have doomed themselves to perdition because they got partisan and deceitful. Look, and they were also willingly blind because they didn't pay attention to the new media at all.
Well, nobody could be that bad at their job. No janitor could be so horrible at his job and still have a job the next day. Joe Scarborough lies every day. He sits in a chair at MSNBC at a giant corporation to lie. Somebody up there, I don't know who his boss is, but somebody up the chain of the corporation knows that he's lying about all of these things. They know that Joy Reid is in essence a neo-racist, or that Rachel Maddow spent 3 years relentlessly lying about vaccines and COVID. So what people, I think, have to understand is they're paid to lie.
Well,
they are well paid to push a particular narrative.
Part of the difference with the old media, let's say, the corporate media, and the new media is that those organizations are corporations, and the people that you see are the front men for the organization.
Exactly.
They're not investigative. They're not independent investigative journalists. Now, I know you claim that that you're not a journalist, and technically that's true, but that's the roughest equivalent because I don't know, apart from podcaster, I don't know what the definition is. So
yeah, I would. It's something like I'm trying to translate the nonsense, but that's not a
talk show host.
Yeah, I'm a talk show host. Yeah, whatever Phil Donahue was. That's what I am.
Well, that's that's right. Yeah. That's what I'm doing with my podcast too. They're talk shows.
But why is it then that for the last let's say starting when COVID started, like that day, all of the hoaxes that we've all been through, why is it that I didn't fall for any of them? Why is it that my track record, I get political predictions wrong all the time. I thought DeSantis could win the primary. I have no problem admitting that. I thought there was a different way the Republicans could go. And by the way, I'm thrilled with the result. I couldn't be happier. I fought for Trump and all that stuff. So putting aside political predictions, why is it that I didn't screw up why didn't I fall for all of the hoaxes? Why, when the Jussie Smollett thing came out and they said that two black guys, or that he was lynched by two guys with MAGA hats who said this is MAGA country, and it turned out to be these black brothers that he paid. Why is it that I didn't immediately fall for the hoax? Yeah, Kamala Harris immediately tweeted out that this proves we're a white supremacist nation, and I think that's still I think that tweet is still up. Why is it that MSNBC fell for every hoax? Why is it that I didn't fall for all of the COVID hoaxes? By day 15, I thought, okay, 2 weeks to stop the spread. We're done now. And now they've moved on to something else. It's not because I'm some kind of genius. Why did you not fall for all these hoaxes? Why did Rogan not really fall for all these hoaxes? And everyone, I'd say to some degree, we all got screwed up by COVID in some ways. And, I think you've even said that you got, I think I did your first interview back after your health stuff, and you said that you got vaxxed, and you thought the whole idea was now the government, if I can quote you directly, was leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah. That is what I thought. I thought, okay.
And it's interesting. I remember thinking when you said that to me on air, I thought that's interesting because I never thought that. I thought if I do it, they'll never leave me alone. And I think that actually turned out to be more true in some sense.
100%. Yeah,
but what is it? What is it about us then?
Well, I think partly we put our finger on it with regard to the fact that you don't have a whole corporation behind you composed of people and advertisers that are all thinking the same thing and purveying the same message, right? So you can go out and scavenge for information. That's the other thing too, is the information environment that surrounds you. This is a point they made on MSNBC. I think it was the guy who runs Axios, who was the commentator. I think we're going to probably clip that into this show. He pointed out that, people who are on the cutting edge of the technological world, let's say the online media world, they're information scavengers. Like I gather information from, I'm on X a fair bit, but I gather information from a lot of different sources. It's not an easy thing to do. And so the information pipeline that you have isn't a legacy media monolith by any stretch of the imagination. And I think a lot of these people, the charitable interpretation is rather than being outright purveyors of falsehoods, they're in an ecosystem where it's like a monoculture. Everybody thinks the same thing.
Right. It's like a fish swimming in water that's so polluted, a tank that's so polluted that he can't see right in front of him, even though his memory's short anyway, but now he literally can't see where he's swimming. I mean, think about it. Why is it that I did a video in 2019, people can find it, saying Joe Biden has clearly the beginnings of dementia or something cognitively wrong with him. 2019. Again, I'm not a doctor. I was just watching the videos like everybody else. I watched the corn pop video.
But how much time do you spend every week looking at media information?
No, an awful lot.
Well, how much?
I mean, I would say I'm definitely within the X Twitter ecosystem a couple hours a day. So that's a pretty significant amount of time. I try not to do it on the weekends. You know, I do my August off the grid thing, which I think also has helped me stay sane throughout this, because I get out of the hamster wheel basically, once a year for 8 years now. But the Biden cognitive issue, they lied and lied and lied, and they kept saying, don't see what you see. And he's still president right now.
I know, it's unbelievable.
Although something seems to have turned on, because I think he's starting to realize, man, he's got a legacy and he can figure it out in the next 2 months. And I think his legacy, if he's smart, and I don't know what's left of him, but if Jill and whoever else is around him that has sense with them, they have an incredible opportunity right now, and I hope they'll take this. The opportunity is, you have no reason to placate to the left. You were brought in because you were old Joe the moderate. You weren't crazy Bernie. You weren't Elizabeth Warren. You weren't one of the radicals. You governed like one of them. They took advantage of you. But now they clearly tried to screw you by forcing him out. He's basically said that. I mean, that's what he said on The View, that they forced him out. He thought he was going to win. So we'll find out what happened there one day, because eventually the truth will come out. But what an interesting moment he has right now. He has 2 months to say, I have no reason to play with you children anymore, and I can build a legacy. So what could my legacy be? Well, maybe Donald Trump's not Hitler. And maybe I could do a few things like, I don't know, maybe somehow winding down some portion of the Iraq war, or helping Israel win their war, getting our hostages back, the American hostages, if not the Israelis, or maybe doing something about the border, which they are doing a little more now. He has an interesting moment right now where his legacy could be, he took us to the precipice of hell. He got taken advantage of, right? They'll write about it one day. But then right there, when he had a moment, the 2 months between administrations, he did something right. And I don't think that's complete. A lot of people are saying I'm nuts for that. But if you were Joe Biden, and again, we don't know what's really in his mind or what he's capable of cognitively at this point, but wouldn't that be a pretty good ending to the story?
The world is too complicated for us to deal with, and that's one of the problems that we face on an ongoing basis. And then the question is, well, what do you do about that? And if you ignore it, it gets worse, so ignoring it doesn't work. And so we know what doesn't work, and so if ignoring it doesn't work, then attending to it might work. And that slots very nicely into the hero mythology that promotes the idea that if there's a dragon in the neighborhood, let's say, that hiding in the basement just makes it grow larger. It's time to go out and confront the damn thing. And the general stories well, you might get killed because it's a dragon, but it's only might, as opposed to definitely will get killed if it happens to attack you at 3 a.m. at home when you're hungover and it's been a bad day and you don't have your sword and your shield at the ready, which is generally what happens to people who avoid things. So it's not something that should be recommended. How much time do you spend maintaining a house? Well, a lot. And why is that? Is because the house falls apart because you're stupid, and the house falls apart, well, because you do repairs wrong or you ignore things, right? The house falls apart because you're incompetent. But even if you're competent, the house falls apart, right? It's just entropy. And so things have a proclivity to fall apart on their own. So you just have to run like mad just to keep them doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then, of course, that is complicated by your own willful blindness and inadequacy as a repair person and refusal to attend and all those other things. So, and that's a very classic idea. The idea that the earth is periodically flooded for 2 reasons. One is things fall apart. Just entropy. It's straight entropy. Things fall apart of their own accord. And that's one of the things that we have to contend with. And then the rate at which things fall apart is sped by the sins of men. That's the other idea. And you know that. Everyone knows that because you know, your car breaks down on the highway and you think, God, that's so inconvenient. And then you shake your fist at the sky, and then there's part of you in the back of your mind that goes, God, I knew that rattle that I wasn't paying attention to actually signified something, and I knew I should have paid attention to it, and I didn't, and now I'm in the situation that I'm in now. And I bet you this happens to people 2 or 3 times a week, is they do something stupid that they know they shouldn't have done, that they told themselves not to do mere seconds before, and they know the voice says, don't do that. Yeah, you do it. You can get nailed for it exactly the way that you knew you would get nailed for it. And then you're hurt doubly because not only did it fall apart, but you're the idiot that made it fall apart, knowing full well that it was going to fall apart and ignoring it. And so that's the idea behind the notion that there are 2 reasons that things fall apart: thermodynamic entropy and the proclivity of people not to attend to things they know they should attend to. And partly we do that because if a problem emerges, it always announces itself, unless it's a really, really tiny problem and you're approaching it voluntarily, it always announces itself with negative emotion. And no wonder, because it's a problem, right? And one of the logical responses is to sort of freeze in the face of the problem. But of course, if it's a problem that has to be addressed and solved, freezing it and turning away from it is not a good solution, because since things tend to fall apart on their own accord, if you just leave the thing alone that's problematic, it's just going to get worse, not better, which is one of the things that's very annoying about life. So, for example, if you get a warning message from the tax department, the probability that ignoring that will make it go away is 0, right? What will happen instead is that the more you ignore it, the larger it will grow. And if you ignore it long enough, then it will turn into something large enough to eat you. And that will be the end of you. It's unbelievable the degree to which our sanity depends on a functioning sociological structure. And here's why. Well, first of all, you kind of need to know what to do every day. You have to have a routine, because you're an animal, and, if you have a dog or a cat, dogs are a really good example of this. Dogs like routine. They like to be walked the number of times a day that they're supposed to be walked, and they get quite sick very rapidly if you don't routinize their days. Children are exactly the same way. Now, you can overdo it, right? But still, you need to know approximately when you should get up. It should be approximately the same every day. You need to know approximately when you're going to eat. You need to know what you're going to eat. You need to know who you're going to eat with. You need to know where to buy your food. It's like 80% of your life, 70% of your life, something like that, consists of those things that you do every single day, that you repeat. And those are often the things that people think about as the trivial elements of their life. But one of the things I would like to point out to you, if you do the mathematics, I did this with a client of mine who was having a hard time putting his child to bed. They were having a fight every night. And I knew by that time, the studies indicate that most parents only spend 20 minutes per day of one-on-one time with their child. Now, the reason for that is that people are busy, and it's actually not that easy to parse out 20 minutes of one-on-one time. It's a lot bloody more time than you think. But that's all there is, 20 minutes. And he's spending like 40 minutes a day fighting with this kid, trying to get the kid to go to bed. And that's not very entertaining. You think, well, it's just having a scrap with the kid about going to bed. But it's no. If it happens every day, it's a catastrophe. So you do the math. So we'll say 5 hours a week for the sake of argument, just to keep it simple. It's 20 hours a month. It's 240 hours a year. That's 6 40-hour work weeks. So that guy was basically spending a month and a half of work weeks doing absolutely nothing but having a wretched time fighting with his son, trying to get him to go to bed. Horrible, right? That's just way too much time to spend doing something like that if you want to actually have a positive relationship with someone, because it's just too punishing. And so you need structure, you need predictability, and you need more of it than you think, just to keep you sane. Now, if you're lucky, and maybe a bit odd, you can deviate 5% from the norm, or 10% from the norm, or something like that, carefully and cautiously, as long as the rest of you is all well ordered in a normative manner. You might be able to get away with that, and you might be able to sustain it across time, and people might be able to tolerate you if you do it, or maybe you'll get really lucky and you happen to be creative but reasonably well put together, and people will actually be happy that there's something idiosyncratic and unique about you. But even under those circumstances, mostly what you want is to have a routine that's disciplined, that's predictable, and bloody well stick to it. You're going to be way healthier and happier and saner if you do that. And then the other thing that you need, because this is one of the things the psychoanalysts got wrong, I think, is that they overestimated the degree to which sanity was a consequence of being properly structured internally, because from the psychoanalytic point of view, you're sort of an ego, and that ego is inside you. And of course, it rests on an unconscious structure. But the purpose of psychoanalysis is to sort out that unconscious structure and the ego on top of it, and to make you a fully functioning and autonomous individual. But there's a problem with that, because the reason that you're sane as a fully functional and autonomous human being isn't because you've organized your psyche, even though that's important. The reason that you're sane if you have a well-organized unconscious and ego is because other people can tolerate having you around for reasonably extensive periods of time and will cuff you across the back of the head every time you do something so stupid that people will dislike you permanently if you continue. And so what people are doing to each other all the time, just nonstop, is broadcasting sanity signals back and forth, right? It's like you smile at people if they're not only behaving properly, but behaving in a way that you would like to see them continue to behave. You frown at them if they're not. You ignore them if they're not. You shun them. You roll your eyes at them. You manifest a disgust face. You don't listen to them. You interrupt them. You won't cooperate with them. You won't compete with them. It's like you're blasting signals at other people about how to regulate their behavior so frequently, it just makes up all of your social interaction. That's why we face each other, and we have emotional displays on our face, and we're looking at each other's eyes, and we know as much as we can about what's going on with each other, given that we don't have immediate access to the contents of their consciousness. And so partly what you're doing with your routine is establishing yourself as a credible, reliable, trustworthy, potentially interesting human being who isn't going to do anything too erratic at any moment. And everyone else is around there tapping you into shape, making sure that that's exactly what you are. And that's how you stay sane. And so what happens to people too, if they don't have a routine and they get isolated, is they start to drift. And they drift badly because the world is too complicated for you to keep it organized all by yourself. You just cannot do it. So we outsource the problem of sanity. And it's very intelligent that we outsource the problem of sanity, because sanity is an impossibly complex problem. And so the way that we manage the incredibly complex problem is we have a very large number of brains working simultaneously on the problem all the time. It's like a stock market for sanity.
Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And the reason for that is that that's a very good starting position to straighten out your life. It's really helpful to be careful about what you say and to not say things that you know are false. I mean, it's not a straightforward thing to do, and that doesn't mean you get to tell the truth as a weapon. That's not the truth. That's a partial truth masquerading as truth to use as a weapon. I mean, you have to be sophisticated about it, but it's very useful to discipline yourself not to use your language in a manipulative manner. It doesn't work. It's a very, very bad medium to long-term strategy, and your life will become much simpler in a good way, much less anxiety-provoking, and much more exciting and adventurous if you just say what you think. Or even more importantly, don't say things you know to be untrue. One suggestion I have for people is that they listen to what they say and feel how it makes them feel physically. And what you'll see if you start to pay attention is that some things you say make you feel like you're standing on firm ground, and other things that you say disconnect you and produce a feeling of disunity and weakness. And you might think, well, that's worth it because I'm manipulating the world in some particular way to get what I want, and it'll probably work. It's like, it's not worth it. It won't work. It will kick back, and you will be punished for it. So one of the things that I've learned as a clinical psychologist, which is actually quite a terrifying thing to learn, is that it's terrifying when I think of my own life. I've never seen anyone get away with anything, ever. Everything you do that you know to be wrong will absolutely come back and haunt you.
and usually in a magnified way. And so it's very useful to know that and to be terrified enough of that so that you become careful with what you say. So telling the truth, that presupposes you know the truth. You can strive towards the truth. I don't think you can know it, but you can certainly know when you're about to say something that's patently untrue by your own definition, and you can certainly not do that. So, and that's an excellent place to start. It will, if you do that for a number of years, your life will change radically and positively. Classically speaking, the two highest virtues are truth and love, and it's difficult to put one of those ahead of the other. Love means something like hoping and striving for the best for things, despite the fact that they're inadequate and damaged and perverse and often malevolent. And that's part of, say, love your enemies is, well, what do you want for your enemies? Well, you might say you want their defeat. Maybe you want their violent, painful defeat, but it's better to want their transformation. It's better in all regards to want that and to hope for that and to act towards them in a manner that might facilitate that. So, and that's part of that courageous attitude towards existence that would manifest itself in positive regard for living things. And it's hard to talk about those things, especially love, because the word has been weakened by misuse, which is why I offered the definition I offered. It's like, it's an attitude of courage to want the best for life, because life is very cruel and harsh, and it's easy to become turned against it and bitter. And there are reasons for that, but it's not helpful. It's wrong, despite the fact that there are reasons for it. Bitterness is of no utility. So even though, I've met many people who've had very, very hard lives, and to see them become bitter is not a surprise. But there's no utility whatsoever in it. All it does is make it worse. So grin and bear it, so to speak. And that's part of aiming upward. And it is an attitude of courage, a voluntary attitude of courage. And truth serves that goal best. So how could it be otherwise? You can think about, you have an option. You can either have reality on your side or against you. If you abide by the truth, then you have reality on your side. You have reality against you. It's like you think you're going to come out ahead in that dispute. You only think that if you've developed a certain amount of arrogance, which is also another very dangerous thing. I can get away with it. It's like, no, you can't. You are so outmatched by reality that there's no contest. I think the only real natural resource, apart from air, is honesty. It's the basis for wealth. Because if two people treat each other honestly, they can take each other at their word and then they can cooperate. Otherwise, like if I can't trust you, God only knows what you're up to. You're so complicated that we can't do something simple and straightforward and directed together, because we're going to spend all of our time trying to figure out what in the world is going on. And this is partly why so much poverty in the world is actually generated by corruption, rather than an absolute lack of material, an absolute lack of material. Corruption is a force that produces poverty like nothing else. So honesty, integrity, and then all the things that you can be gifted with, intelligence, hard work. It takes a lot of rare traits, generally speaking, to push you in the direction of success. It also depends on what you mean by success. So we could do this two ways. We could go after classical success. Yeah, often you need a set of gifts, right, that are given to you at birth to be spectacularly successful at something, say, like sports. Then discipline, that's extraordinarily useful. Intelligence, that's very useful. The marriage of those two. If you have two people who are equally intelligent and one works twice as hard as the other, then the one who works twice as hard is much more likely to be successful. Creativity is another useful attribute. Reciprocity, the ability to reciprocate, that's unbelievably useful. Almost all the people I know who are successful have very broad, well-functioning social networks. So even if they don't know how to do something, they know someone who knows how to do it. And they've maintained their relationships with those people, and they've done it with integrity. So they're trusted. So they have a network of trusted people around them who are highly competent. And so there's an ethical aspect to that, because you don't gather a group of highly useful people around you to trade with unless they trust you. And so honesty is a huge part of it. And I mean, I've seen people go into companies that were failing very dramatically. Competent people go in, and with nothing other than their competence and their honesty, turn the companies around completely. And that's very interesting to watch. And I've consulted in situations where that's been the case. Decide what better means for you. So you have to have a discussion with yourself as if you were someone you cared about. So now we decide you're taking care of yourself. 3 years down the road, you get to have what you want, but you have to figure out what it is. Okay, so do you want an intimate relationship? And if so, what kind of relationship? How are you going to structure it? What about your family? How are you going to get along with your siblings and your parents? Are you going to have kids? Is that going to be part of your life? What are you going to do for your career or your job? How are you going to educate yourself and keep your education updated? How are you going to resist the sort of temptations that take people down? How are you going to take care of yourself mentally and physically? What are you going to do with your time outside of work that's productive and engaging? Imagine you could optimize all that. Okay, so then you need a vision. Okay, what would my life be like if I had that? And what would it look like? Well, then you have to make the right sacrifices to get there. You need to make a strategy. And so you lay out that strategy and then start to pursue it and progress incrementally, right? Little better tomorrow than you were yesterday. And compare yourself to yourself, which is rule 4 in my book. That'll work. You'll be in way better shape very, very rapidly. So, but you can't just wait around for happiness to appear. I mean, unless you define it and pursue it. I mean, things don't happen. Good things tend not to happen randomly, right? Things fall apart randomly. So you need a vision. You need a plan for the future. And, you don't want to make it rigid and tyrannical, and you have to do it in negotiation with yourself. But it's unbelievably effective. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. You need to have a hierarchy of improvement. You need to be aiming for something. And that means you're going to be lesser than people who've already attained along that dimension. It can give rise to envy. So the question is, who should you defeat in the final analysis? And the answer is you should defeat your former self. You should be constantly trying to do that. And you're the right control for yourself too, because you're the one who's had all your advantages and disadvantages. And so if you want to compete fairly with someone, then you should be competing with you. If you're improving yourself, then what you are doing is competing with your lesser self. And then you might also ask, well, what is that lesser self? And that lesser self would be resentful and bitter and aggressive and vengeance-seeking and all of those things that go along with having a negative moral character. And those are things that interfere with your ability to progress as you move forward through life. So it's very necessary to understand that this is why I've been stressing this idea of personal responsibility. It's like, well, personal responsibility is to compete with yourself, is to be slightly better than yourself the next day. Yes. And better in some way that you can actually manage. And that's humility. It's right. Like, well, I'm a flawed person. I've got all my problems. Could I be as good as person X? It's like not the right question. The right question is, could you be slightly better tomorrow than your currently flawed self? And the answer to that is, if you have enough humility to set the bar properly low, then you could be better tomorrow than you are today. Because what you also have to do is you have to say, well, here's all my flaws and my insufficiencies, and the best that someone that flawed and insufficient could do to improve and actually do it is this. And that's not worth going out in the street and celebrating with placards, It's like, well, this is why I tell people to clean their room. So you're not going to brag to someone that you did that. But someone as insufficient as you might be able to manage it. And that means you actually are on the pathway to self-improvement and you're transcending your former self. Resilience is right. Like, look, you're not going to win it. You're not going to score on every shot.
Right.
Doesn't mean you shouldn't take the shots. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try to hit the goal. But part of being able to continue to take shots is to have the strength of character to tolerate the fact that in that instance, you weren't on top. What's the right way of being in the world, if there is such a thing? And it's not acting according to a set of rules. It's attempting continually to transcend the flawed thing that you currently are. And what's so interesting about that is that the meaning in life is to be found in that pursuit. So I've been laying that out in these discussions too, because I say, well, the fundamental issue is that life is tragic and difficult, very tragic and difficult for everyone. And it's also tainted by malevolence, because no matter how things are tragic and difficult, but there's always some stupid thing that you could do or someone else could do that could make it even worse than it has to be. And so that's life. And you need an antidote to that, because that can embitter you. Constant contact with that, just the tragedy, but the tragedy combined with betrayal and malevolence, that makes it even worse, especially if it's self-induced. Okay, so you need something to set against that so you don't get bitter and resentful. Well, what do you set against that? Doing something worthwhile, by your own definition, say. You need some reason to get the hell out of bed on a terrible day because you've got something good to do. Well, what's the best thing you can do? Transcend your current wretched and miserable self. There's meaning to be found in that, and and that's a meaning that's associated with responsibility. One of the things that I've been trying to lay out clearly is that life is hard. It's tainted by malevolence and betrayal. That can make you bitter. You need a meaning to offset that. Where's the meaning to be found? Not in rights, not in impulsive pleasure, but in responsibility. You take responsibility for yourself, so you take care of yourself. If you're good at it, you have some excess left over to take care of your damn family. If you're good at both of those, then you have some excess left over to take care of your community. Those are heavy burdens. You pick up the burdens. You find that's meaningful. The best way to pick up the burden is to continually improve yourself. And that's where the meaning is to be found. And so that meaning is in the continual self-transcendence. That's letting your old self die and the new self be reborn. Even if things are going really well for you now, there's going to be a time in the future where things are rough. You know, you're going to be ill. Family member's going to be ill. A dream is going to fall apart. You're going to be uncertain about your employment status. Like the flood is coming, right? The apocalypse is coming. It's always the case in life. And you have to be prepared for it. And the question is how to prepare for it. And the answer to that is to find a way of being that works even under the direst of circumstances. That's the issue. You've got the possibility to slowly raise yourself out of the mire. You've got the possibility to do just what the fighter does when he's defeated, which is to say, well, regardless of the circumstances that might have led to my defeat, like even if there were errors on the part of the referee, this is no time to whine about it. This is a time to take stock of what I did wrong so that I could improve it into the future. And that's the right attitude. The point is, your best strategic position is, how am I insufficient and how can I rectify that? That's what you've got. And the thing is, you are insufficient and you could rectify it. Both of those are within your grasp. If you aim low enough, it's like, well, I don't know how to start improving my life. Someone might say that. And I would say, well, you're not aiming low enough. There's something you could do that you are regarding as trivial, that you could do, that you would do, that would result in an actual improvement. But it's not a big enough improvement for you. So you won't lower yourself enough to take the opportunity. Aim low. And I don't mean don't aim. And I don't mean don't aim up. But you have to accept the fact that you can set yourself a goal that you can attain. And there's not going to be much glory in it to begin with. Because if you're not in very good shape, the goal that you could attain tomorrow isn't very glorious. But it's a hell of a lot better than nothing. And it beats the hell out of bitterness. And it's way better than blaming someone else. It's way less dangerous. And you could do it. There's a statement in the New Testament. It's called the Matthew Principle, and economists use it to describe how the economy in the world works. To those who have everything, more will be given. From those who have nothing, everything will be taken. It's like what's very pessimistic in some sense, because it means that as you start to fail, you fail more and more rapidly. But it also means that as you start to succeed, you succeed more and more rapidly. And so you take an incremental step, and, well, now you can lift 55 pounds instead of 52.5 pounds. You think, well, what the hell is that? It's like, it's one step on a very long journey. And so it starts to compound on you. So a small step today puts you in a position to take a slightly bigger step the next day. And then that puts you in a position to take a slightly bigger step the next day. And you do that for 2 or 3 years, man, you're starting to stride. You know, and I have so many people coming up to me now. They say, look, I've been listening to your lectures and I've been developing a vision for my life and I've been trying to take responsibility and I've been trying to tell the truth and things are way better. And so that's absolutely perfect. It's the right way forward as far as I'm concerned. And those are people who, they took stock of themselves. They said, I'm in a dark place and I'm a dark person. And here's some things that this dark person in this dark place could do. Little things that they could actually do. I'll clean up my damn room. I'll make my bed. I don't know how many people have come and told me. It's so strange. They said, well, I started making my bed and that made all the difference. It's like, well, yeah, you decided to aim up, man. And the first concrete instantiation of that was that you made your bed. And you think, well, that's nothing heroic. It's like, no, but aiming up is heroic. That's something. And then lowering yourself to the point where you're not above the mess in your room. You know, you're not superordinate to that. You lower yourself so that you straighten up. You're grateful for what you have right in front of you and you take care of it and you put it in order. It's like all of a sudden things start to get better. And it's so wonderful to be doing this tour because I see that's what this tour has been about for me. It's not political. I never talk to people after the talks, for example. I talk to about 150 people a night. We never talk about anything political. It's always this. I wasn't doing very well. I'm putting my life together. I'm getting along better with my father. I'm getting along better with my wife. I'm getting along better with my kids. I've got some meaning in my life. Thanks a lot. It's way better. It's like, yes, that's the right thing. Well, the self-esteem movements and all of that, well, accept yourself the way you are. It's like, no, because you need a trajectory. And one of the things that I think, one of the reasons that audiences are responding to what I've been saying in my lectures and what I've been writing about is that I don't tell people that they're okay the way they are. No, I say, no, you could be way more than you are. And they're relieved about that, you see, because if you're in a dark and terrible place and someone says you're okay the way you are, then you don't know what to do about that. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm having a terrible time and I'm hopeless. You're okay the way you are. Well, then what? That's it? That's where I am? And what do you want to tell a young person? You're 17. You're okay the way you are. It's like, no, you're not. You got 60 years to be better. And you could be way better. You could be incomparably better across multiple dimensions. And in pursuing that better, that's where you'll find the meaning in your life. And that will give you the antidote to the suffering. You have to impose order. People have asked me in my book why I wrote it as an antidote to chaos, because, well, there isn't anything technically wrong with chaos. Chaos is a place of great potential. Well, the question is, what's the proper balance between chaos and order? Chaos, potential, and order. Well, the answer is, look, when you're a kid, you're all potential. It's chaotic potential. It can manifest itself in any number of ways. And maybe you don't want to give that up. So you're like Peter Pan. You want to be a kid forever because you don't want to give up the potential. And you look out in the world and all you see are Captain Hooks, who've lost a hand, who are chased by death because that's the clock in the crocodile. It's already got a taste of him. He's terrified by death and he's a tyrant. Well, I don't want to grow up to be that. So I won't be disciplined at all. Well, that's no good because the way the potential transforms itself into actuality is through discipline. And so then you, as you said, this is the trick though. You have to pick a path of discipline. What path of discipline you have to pick is a different issue. You have to discipline yourself. And the issue is, well, how? That's not really the relevant question. You can pick a disciplinary path. That's why I often tell my clients, especially young people, they say, well, I don't know what to do. It's like, that's okay. Nobody does. Go do something. Do the best thing that you can think of. Put the best plan you have into practice. It's not going to be perfect and it will change along the way, but it will change partly because you become disciplined pursuing the path. And as you become disciplined, you become wiser. And as you become wiser, you become able to formulate better and better plans. So you can start vaguely and confused and develop a plan that's not so great and you start to implement it. And then you accrue incremental wisdom as you implement your flawed plan. And that enables you to fix the plan. Imagine you only have $100,000 to go buy a house. And so you go look at this house and it's like, Jesus, this house, man, it's like it needs a lot of work. It's like, well, that's all you've got. Well, are you going to pretend that the house is okay the way it is?
Or you're going to look for where it's rotten and where the plumbing doesn't work and where the stove doesn't work. You have to go and look and see where everything needs to be fixed. And that is harsh, man. And then in order to do that properly, someone has to have taught you, look, you aren't your problems. Well, you are. You're most fundamentally that which, if it confronts its problems, can solve them. And that's the hero myth in a nutshell, by the way. The hero is the person who confronts horrible, chaotic potential and tames it and makes something of it, right? That's the fundamental human story. But the problem is that you have to face what you don't want to face in order to fix it.
Yeah.
And so you look at all the things about yourself that need to be burned off, that need to be dispensed with. And that, man, especially at the beginning, especially if you're screwed up, that may be like 95% of you just has to go up in flames. And it's painful. Even some of that stuff that you have to burn off doesn't want to die. And it'll scream in agony while you're burning it off. It's not pleasant. But if you know that you're the thing that can transcend your problems, most fundamentally, if you know you're the thing that, if it faces the problems, can transcend them, then you have the faith that would enable you to take stock of who you are. We had people write about their ideal future and also to put in measurement strategies. It's like, okay, here's your ideal future. Here's how you're going to break it into goals. Here's how you're going to mark progress towards those goals, because you got to be playing a fair game with yourself, right? Because when you make progress, you want to reward yourself. So you have to identify what the progress is and you have to reward it. The consequence, we had people write a future plan for only an hour when they came for their school orientation in the summer before going to, it's a community college. And it dropped the dropout rate among young men by 50%. And it's, yeah, no kidding. Wow. 50%. Yeah. And what that meant was, to me, just think about that. What that means is that these kids had been educated for 12 years and no one had ever sat them down and said, okay, what the hell are you doing and why? And how are you going to get, like, where do you want to go? Why do you want to get there? How are you going to get there? How are you going to mark your progress? They've never walked them through that exercise. You walk people through that exercise just to get them to do that increases the probability that they'll stay on track by 50%. One of the things that I think this heightens the meaning in your life, is to try to do difficult things, right? Aim high. Don't aim so damn high you can't manage it, and make sure you break down your aims into reasonably attainable sub-goals, but you want to aim high, and then you want to see how hyper-efficient you can get. That's a great thing to do in your early 20s, is to see, okay, like, discipline yourself. You think, okay, how much work can I do if I load myself right to the maximum? How far can I work? How hard can I work until I exhaust myself? And then you back off, obviously, because the optimal amount of working, productive engagement, let's say, is that which is sustainable across decades. So you have to learn that, but you don't learn that without stretching yourself to your limits to begin with. And, if your life isn't everything it could be, and if you're suffering from an excess of meaninglessness, well, it means you're not oriented in the world of chaos and order properly. It's like you could learn to discipline yourself. Figure out what it is that you need to do and that you want to do, and then see how efficient you can get. Because one of the things that's quite fun is to figure out, if you have a task, I always tell my graduate students this if they're doing an experiment too. If you have a task that you have to do, it's really interesting to spend a few minutes, sometimes hours, depending on how long the task is. See if you can figure out how to do it from 5 to 10 times faster. It means you'll have to rearrange the way you think about it, but you can often do it. And that's how extremely productive people get so hyper efficient. It's unbelievable the degree to which our sanity depends on a functioning sociological structure. And here's why. Well, first of all, you kind of need to know what to do every day. You have to have a routine, because you're an animal, and if you have a dog or a cat, dogs are a really good example of this. Dogs like routine. They like to be walked the number of times a day that they're supposed to be walked, and they get quite sick very rapidly if you don't routinize their days. Children are exactly the same way. Now, you can overdo it, right? But still, you need to know approximately when you should get up. It should be approximately the same every day. You need to know approximately when you're going to eat. You need to know what you're going to eat. You need to know who you're going to eat with. You need to know where to buy your food. It's like 80% of your life, 70% of your life, something like that, consists of those things that you do every single day, that you repeat. Well, so you need structure, you need predictability, and you need more of it than you think, just to keep you sane. Now, if you're lucky, and maybe a bit odd, you can deviate 5% from the norm, or 10% from the norm, or something like that.
carefully and cautiously, as long as the rest of you is all well ordered in a normative manner. You might be able to get away with that, and you might be able to sustain it across time, and people might be able to tolerate you if you do it, or maybe you'll get really lucky and you happen to be creative but reasonably well put together, and people will actually be happy that there's something idiosyncratic and unique about you. But even under those circumstances, mostly what you want is to have a routine that's disciplined, that's predictable, and bloody well stick to it. You're going to be way healthier and happier and saner if you do that. And then the other thing that you need, because this is one of the things the psychoanalysts got wrong, I think, is that they overestimated the degree to which sanity was a consequence of being properly structured internally, Because from the psychoanalytic point of view, you're sort of an ego, and that ego is inside you. And of course, it rests on an unconscious structure. But the purpose of psychoanalysis is to sort out that unconscious structure and the ego on top of it, and to make you a fully functioning and autonomous individual. But there's a problem with that, because the reason that you're sane as a fully functional and autonomous human being isn't because you've organized your psyche, even though that's important. The reason that you're sane if you have a well-organized unconscious and ego is because other people can tolerate having you around for reasonably extensive periods of time, and will cuff you across the back of the head every time you do something so stupid that people will dislike you permanently if you continue. And so what people are doing to each other all the time, just nonstop, is broadcasting sanity signals back and forth, right? It's like you smile at people if they're not only behaving properly, but behaving in a way that you would like to see them continue to behave. You frown at them if they're not. You ignore them if they're not. You shun them. You roll your eyes at them. You manifest a disgust face. You don't listen to them. You interrupt them. You won't cooperate with them. You won't compete with them. It's like you're blasting signals at other people about how to regulate their behavior so frequently, it just makes up all of your social interaction. That's why we face each other, and we have emotional displays on our face, and we're looking at each other's eyes, and we know as much as we can about what's going on with each other, given that we don't have immediate access to the contents of their consciousness. And so partly what you're doing with your routine is establishing yourself as a credible, reliable, trustworthy, potentially interesting human being who isn't going to do anything too erratic at any moment. And everyone else is around there tapping you into shape, making sure that that's exactly what you are. And that's how you stay sane. And so what happens to people too, if they don't have a routine and they get isolated, is they start to drift. And they drift badly because the world is too complicated for you to keep it organized all by yourself. You just cannot do it. So we outsource the problem of sanity. And it's very intelligent that we outsource the problem of sanity, because sanity is an impossibly complex problem. And so the way that we manage the incredibly complex problem is we have a very large number of brains working simultaneously on the problem all the time.
Let's say I was dealing with a client, and maybe that was somebody who, say a man, 35 years old, he still lived at home. So he was too dependent. His room is a complete bloody catastrophe. And, he's living like a bratty 13-year-old, and that gets pretty ugly by the time you're 35. And he knew it, and I'm sure his mother knew it, although obviously she put up with it, which was probably her mistake, at least in part. But maybe we decide, let's start by cleaning your room. And so as a cognitive behavioral psychologist, you engage in a process called collaborative empiricism. And that's partly to solve the problem that you described as, how do we know we set the right goal? Well, we'd say, go try it. And just watch yourself like you don't know who you are, and come back next week and we'll see how you did. And maybe, I remember this one client, he came back and he said, I went and got the vacuum cleaner from the closet, which is something I really never done. And I put that vacuum cleaner in the doorway of my bedroom, crossways, so it blocked the doorway. And then I just walked over it for a whole week. And look, he was completely nonplussed at his own intransigence. And look what he did, eh? He was so resentful and so angry that he, instead of vacuuming his damn bedroom like he planned, he just stuck the vacuum in his own way and then martyred himself over it every day for a week. It's like,
Okay, then, we're starting to get somewhere with the whole you living at home thing here. And so, well, that was too high a goal for him. And you say, well, how do you know that? It's like, well, he didn't do it, did he? So then what you do practically is you say, well, how about you bring that vacuum cleaner into your room this week, and that's your whole assignment. And just watch what happens when you bring it in. Watch the fantasies that flicker in the back of your mind as you live out your resentment at your therapist for daring to make you bring that vacuum across the threshold of your bedroom. And so if people catch those fantasies, whew, that's quite the bloody nightmare and quite the revelation to themselves, I can tell you, because you have to be one angry person to put a vacuum cleaner in your doorway and walk over it every day for a week. And so then we'd get somewhere. It's like, okay, now we're getting to the bottom of things, but maybe the next week he'd come back, well, with the fantasies at hand and rather shocked as a consequence, but the vacuum cleaner was then in his room. And so he broke the threshold there, and then maybe all he could do was sort out a drawer or half a drawer, something like that. So what you do is, you pick a target that you think is probably reasonable, and you can negotiate that with yourself.
You cite a tired brain, foggy thinking, as the reason to stop answering questions or giving a talk. How do you combat this while working or writing daily? Well, I eat a big breakfast relatively soon on waking. That really helps. If any of you out there are anxious, and many of you no doubt are, there'll be a large number of you who are anxious and don't eat breakfast. And there'll be a whole bunch of you out there who think, well, I don't eat breakfast. It isn't necessary. It's like, that's wrong. It's necessary. You fasted all night. If you load yourself cognitively or physiologically in the morning, your brain, stressed, will encourage your body to produce insulin. It will take all the blood sugar out of your blood, and then you're done for the day. And then you'll be anxious. And a lot of the rest of you too, you'll find if you're anxious, try this. It's really, really interesting experiment. The next time you're anxious, go eat something. Eat some protein and fat would be best. You could have cheese and crackers. I'm not a big fan of carbohydrates, but whatever. Eat whatever you're willing to eat, but make it solid. Don't eat a peanut butter, or don't eat a chocolate bar or something sweet. Eat something substantial, a piece of meat, a piece of cheese, some peanut butter, something like that. And then wait 10 minutes and see if you're less anxious. And try that for 2 weeks. Every time you get anxious, eat something. Because then you can find out if your anxiety is linked to low blood sugar. And it's very likely that it is, especially if you also get irritable and foggy in your thinking. And the best way to treat that, as far as I've been able to tell, and there's a decent literature on this, is to make sure that you eat a big breakfast. And you might say, well, I'm not hungry in the morning. It's like, who the hell cares if you're hungry? I didn't say enjoy your breakfast. I said eat it. That's not the same thing. There's lots of things that you need to do that you don't enjoy to begin with. You'll get hungry in 6 months, and then you'll start to enjoy it. So that's a massive difference. I take small naps quite frequently. If I'm wiped out, I'll go have a nap for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And then that helps quite a lot. I try to wake up on a fairly regular schedule. That's another thing I would really recommend for people whose lives are in disarray and who are anxious. Try to fix your wake time. Going when you sleep, that's not so important. So you can still, stay up late and have fun and all that. But getting up in the morning is really helpful. So, and you also have to figure out how much you can work or write. I can't write for more than about my sustainable maximum for writing is 3 hours a day. And if I push it past that, then, especially if I'm editing, I make mistakes when I'm editing, so that's counterproductive, and I can't sustain it across time. And so I don't really think you can do more than about 3 hours of extremely intense intellectual work a day. Although if you have a nap, you can stretch that, but I think at least I end up paying for it across time. So nap, make sure you eat, and make sure that you get enough sleep. So that's how I combat it and try to make myself hyper efficient. It's an oratorio in Montreal. I think it's the second largest one in the world. It's set on a hill, at the top of a hill. And there's a huge staircase leading up to it from the bottom of the hill. And people often who are crippled and who are on crutches and so forth, or in wheelchairs, go there and make their way painfully up the hill. Or maybe they do that on their knees. And the idea is that they're struggling incrementally uphill, step by step, despite their burdens, to reach the city of God on the hill. And they're acting out. That's life. It's like the proper aim is the city of God on the hill. And what is that? Well, that's that place where these levels of responsibility are stacked together harmoniously so that you're acting in your best interest and in your family's best interest and in the world's best interest. And I would say in the best interests of reality itself, right? Assuming that we have some integral role to play in reality, which is certainly at least true at the human level. That's the city of God on the hill that beckons to everyone. And you move towards that humbly. So that's one step at a time. And you do it despite your burden and your suffering. All of that. And that's all dramatized in that. And it's a perfect drama of that. My granddaughter, who's 14 months old, has just learned a new game. And the game is she plays it with her wooden spoon. And the game is she has the spoon, and then she looks at you, and then she gives you the spoon. And then you take it from her, and she lets it go. And then she watches you, and then you give the spoon back. And she's very happy to get the spoon back. But she's also very happy to give it to you. And then she turns to the next person, and she gives them the spoon, and then she gets it back. And then you can play with her. And the play is, well, now you've started to embody the principle of reciprocity, right? We can trade. And it's a repeating game. It's not one trade. You don't end up with the spoon, and I don't end up with the spoon. We both have the spoon some of the time across time. And there's some utility in the exchange itself. Okay, so she's playing with that and thrilled about it. And no wonder, because it's a walloping discovery. And so then you take the spoon from her, and maybe you hold it a little longer than she expects, and that makes her a little nervous, but then you give it back, and then she's relieved, and that makes her happy. Or you cover the spoon with your hand, and then she's a bit confused about where it might be, and you show it to her, and you give it back, and she's happy about that. Or she reaches out to grab it, and you pull it away a little bit, and move it back and forth, so she has to do a little more effort to get it. And as long as you don't push that, and it's a bit of a challenge to her, both physically in terms of coordination, but also psychologically in terms of delay of gratification, she also finds that gratifying. And the reason for that is that you're showing how robust and resilient the idea of reciprocity is across sequences of transformations. And so the Piagetian idea is something like, there's an implicit morality that emerges to constrain the infinite set of interpretations, and it has to do with the structure that will maintain reciprocity optimally in the largest, including the largest number of people across the largest amount of time. And so the way that I've been portraying that for the people who've been listening to my lectures is that, well, you need to take responsibility for yourself, as if you care for yourself. Okay, so first we figure out what's yourself. Well, it's not just you now, because you aren't just you now. You're the community of yous that stretch across time. So in order for you to take care of yourself properly now, you have to learn to play an iterative game with yourself that's sustainable and even potentially improvable across time. And there aren't many games that you can play like that, so that starts to radically constrain the set of possibilities. And then it's more constrained than that, because not only do you have to play a game with yourself that can repeat across time to minimize suffering, to remove the possibility of death, to allow for the possibility of productive movement and a certain amount of happiness. But you have to do that with other people around you and across time. And so there's you and the multiple yous embedded in your family and the multiplicity of your family members embedded inside a culture and the extension of that culture across time. And so for you to act properly, then all of those things have to be harmoniously balanced at the same time. And that radically reduces the set of potential interpretations. And that's the antidote to the chaos of the infinite array of potential perceptual worlds. Well, and then there are questions that emerge out of that, like, well, what's the best way to play that game? But we certainly know that reciprocity, fair play, the spirit of fair play is immensely important to that. And that's what Piaget documented. And it's what we all know. And also that there's something about truth that's absolutely integral to that as well. One of the things I talk about in 12 Rules for Life, and
and in my lectures, this has become a meme, strangely enough, something that's widely distributed on the web, partly because there's a comical element to it. It's to clean up your room. And everyone laughs about that because I'm taking that seriously. It's like, well, clean up your room. Everyone's mother has told them that 1,000 times, right? But I try to explain why. It's like, well, you have a bit of chaotic potential right in front of you. It's, in some sense, infinite in its potential. And the domain in which you can manipulate that might be rather restricted because of the restrictions that are part and parcel of your existence. But maybe you have your room, and you might have contempt for that. And so it's a complete bloody catastrophe. But you don't have to. You could think, well, it isn't a room. It's a place of potential. And as soon as you know that, then it's not your room anymore. It isn't a room. The room that you see is your preconception of the space that you inhabit. What's there is a fragment of infinity. That's what's there. And what you see is the low resolution consequence of your assumption and lazy habit and blindness. That's your initial room. And you think, well, no, that's not the room. See, part of what artists do, for example, when Van Gogh paints a room and you look at it glowing, he's trying to show you what's beyond your perception of the room. And I mean this technically, like the way that your visual system is set up is that whenever memory and presumption can replace direct perception, it will, because it's simpler. So you literally see what you expect to see. And if what you see is dull and drab and boring and pointless and uninspiring, then that's you. It's not what's there. And what the artist does when he or she re-represents that mundane reality is to remind you of what's behind it, the potential that's there. And so what I'm suggesting to people is that they take the potential that's right in front of them. It's like, okay, and here's the rule. You're aiming up. There's something that you could change, that you would change. That might be a very small thing. Could, well, that's within the grasp of your power. Would is within the grasp of your will. To combine those two things might be a very small shift. You might only be willing to make a very tiny step forward. It's like, fine, good enough. Make a tiny step forward. And that makes you a slight bit stronger than you were before. And then the next step can be slightly larger. And it's the path of humility. What human beings confront in their lives is akin to what God himself confronted at the beginning of time. And so it's easy for us to believe that we're deterministic creatures like clocks, and that it's the past that drives us forward in a deterministic manner into the future. But I don't believe that's the case. I actually don't think there's any evidence that that's the case, because people are so complex you actually can't predict them as if they're deterministic, except in very constrained circumstances. And so it's a hypothesis, but it's not a very good one. What seems to me to be the case, and I think this is how people conceptualize themselves and how they act towards themselves and towards other people, and how our social structures, our political structures are constituted, is that human beings constantly confront a landscape of possibility. It's potential itself. And we have a belief in the idea of potential. We have an idea that there are things that could be. It's a very strange conception of reality, because it's not a materialistic conception, because things that could be aren't measurable in any sense, right? But we certainly act as if they exist. And we all treat each other as if one of our fundamental ethical requirements is for you to confront that potential properly. And that would be to live up to your responsibility. It's just you have these gifts and talents and possibilities that have been granted to you. And if you fail to make use of them, your talents, let's say, then that's a sin of sorts. And that's a religious way of thinking about it, but it doesn't matter, because that's how people treat each other. If you have a child, for example, or a spouse, or a friend, brother, anyone you care about, and you have the intuition that they could be making more of themselves and what they have than they are, then you're deeply disappointed in that. And the reason you're disappointed in that is because there's a call to us, an existential call, to confront that potential that's everywhere, that faces us in every direction, and to transform it into the most functional and habitable order possible. And the way that that is to be done properly is with truth.